Okay, so good morning. We're going to get started here. Today we're going to have a quite full day filled with discussion of analysis components of this work, making sense of the data once you've secured it, and the relationship with some online triggering mechanisms a bit as well. We're also going to include today some more refined understanding of some of the topics we've been talking about, both on the interaction between sort of self-reporting mechanisms on the one hand, some discussion from Kevin on the interactions sort of a consumer's guide to sensor data, so that you understand some of the strengths but also limitations and characteristics, the types of insight that can be reliably secured and not from certain types of sensor data. We're also going to use today for some case studies, brief looks at particular studies that have been run, to give a glimpse of some practical applications of the system, and further discussion of the linkage between two topics near and dear to my heart, to wit, the sort of data that we're talking about, which provides high-resolution understanding of health behaviors, health exposures, contexts, on the one hand, that really lets us focus in on mechanisms and causal pathways that mediate the success or lack thereof of interventions. So that's one topic, and then the other topic is dynamic modeling, which in many ways has much in common at a conceptual level, in the sense that it focuses on mechanisms, pathways, and in helping us understand particularly outcomes in the context of counterfactual interventions. And we'll see one example that relates to that in the form of a guest presentation from Aiden. We're going to have a couple student presentations today, one from Aiden related to his work on foodborne illness, and another from a very senior and very extraordinarily knowledgeable graduate student in our group, Wen Shofeng, who will be presenting on some practical tools that you can use for data visualization and for understanding features of the data that don't happen to be captured currently within the Ethica interface. So let's talk a little bit about what we saw yesterday, though. Reflect on that a bit. It's going to affect where we're going today. We started out yesterday with a discussion of some of the challenges and textures of issues that come up in the context of human ethics review boards, discussing some of the points of note and concern, which are traditionally featured there, and some tips for working with boards to educate them, to address concerns on their part, and to help them put this work in perspective. We also spent quite a bit of time in study management and operation, and much of that was spent discussing different aspects of First, we really talked about study design. This isn't fully reflected in the study in the schedule, and I've got to update this. So, some aspects of study design, which we hadn't had time to previously capture. Those include things like choice of study study designs which include phones that are handed out or mobile devices that are instead owned by participants. We talked about the use of things like Wi-Fi as a data backhaul versus cellular data networks, and a couple other aspects of study design that were germane to thinking through the choices in your study. We saw some work on, saw a presentation on study budgeting, the different components within that study, and we spent quite a bit of time on study management and operation. To give some insights into how you run a study on an ongoing basis and how you monitor incoming data for that study in order to secure some sense as to emerging needs, particularly in the area of identifying individuals in the study who might need to be nudged to make sure that they carry the phone, that they answer the questions, that they enable sensors such as GPS, which can be easily disabled through smartphone interfaces, and that they contribute proactively certain types of content which the study, upon which the study relies. Okay, we discussed some of those issues and monitoring those individuals. And we looked at how through the interface for Ethica, we could actually secure some insights into participation by individuals. We could look, say, at the degree to which they contributed survey content, and so responded to questionnaires. We also looked at some measures of sensor data received. Through that compliance tab, we can keep track of the volume of data that is coming from different sensors that are present on their device, and use it to monitor something about their involvement. For example, do they have the GPS sensor enabled? We saw there were periods of time where even highly compliant study members might have the no data coming from sensors, either because the phone was off or because because that individual disabled certain sensors on an ad hoc basis. Okay, and we also saw how the Ethica website could be used to monitor and compare the relative involvement of different individuals, and some aggregate course measures on the overview area of the site under the participants tab, how there are some overall measures of sort of fraction of all theoretically possible sensor data that had been received. And there's some error bars with it, but it gives some sense as to basically what level of sensor data is being uploaded by a given participant. And Mohammed noted that there are certain phones in a hall of infamy, from an Ethica perspective, that involve something like 4 phones or 5 phones of known concern, that seem to exhibit difficulties with respect to sensor data or other adverse interactions with the Ethica system.
Soon they will join the other group of compliance and phones.
Oh, okay. So Aiden assures me that these phones are correctable and their failings, and that they will soon be remedied and will join the rank of exemplary phone models. So it's good to know that that's being worked on. Okay, so those were some components we saw yesterday. We also had some nice presentations from Mohammed's side involving the iPhone. Take a glimpse at the iPhone interface and showing some of the ways in which that interface shares characteristics of the interface on the on Android, in some ways in which it departs. Some limitations, but also some aesthetic enhancements that were brought by the iPhone development team. Mohammed, you gave an additional presentation yesterday on which I'm drawing a blank.
It was the smartwatch with
The smartwatch, right.
with,
Thank you very much. So Amin had demonstrated the use of a smartwatch, and we noted that wearable devices, things like smartwatches, smart shirts, these tools that are increasingly becoming available to general consumers, that those sort of mechanisms can be fruitfully paired with smartphones, with the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. The value of pairing a smartphone on the one hand with wearable devices on the other, not including their blood glucometers and continuous blood glucometers, blood pressure meters, respiration sensors, etc. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because I argued that the value from cross-linking these pieces of information and having them joined together to trigger surveys, for example, on the device, lent Ethica a very significant amount of extra power that belies simple number of sensor streams added. It can add a lot of insight, and particularly for some domains such as mental health. The types of data that can be collected by wearables go well beyond what can be achieved with the physical measures available on the phone by itself. Okay, so we saw wearable devices increasing rapidly in their penetration of the market, and in their use can also be fruitfully paired up. And I think it's fair to say that over time this is going to be an area of significant development, particularly in our labs here, but also some on the Ethica side, to bring more devices to bear on within the Ethica ecosystem. So that was a little bit of retrospective yesterday. I was happy to see the projects moving forward in the afternoon. And today we're going to have a full day and quite a bit of time to move those